Start the recording. Hello, Dota 2 fans. I mean Gareth and Grant. But anyways, MRP, your resident Canadian Dota 2 caster. We're going to talk a little fantasy today. And before I spoil my picks, we'll talk a little bit about what it means to play Dota 2. You've played Dota 2 for thousands of years. But you always wanted cards with players' faces on them. So, in light of that, boom. Look at this. Bored at work today. Made a little presentation here. Spoilers. And let's walk you through it there, folks. Orgasm production value. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about how I feel fantasy is skewed and what are the most important modifiers. So on the left, I've listed pretty much every metric. First Blood is at the bottom, even though it's the most retarded metric to try and predict. Deaths is a little bit of a wonky one too. Very few hero players are going to give you any points off deaths. Maybe Burning will give you some, but we'll talk about those later. These are the things that you'll need to get one fantasy point, basically. 3 kills, 7 assists, 333 last hits, 500 GPM, which I think is probably the most underrated, underperforming stat, if anything. 500 GPM gives you a point. That's pretty retarded. Tower kill gives you 1 point. A Roche kill gives you 1 point. Being involved in 33% of team fights gives you a point. This, though, is probably the most OP stat in fantasy, and that is Obs wards planted. 2 wards gives you a full point. We'll talk a little bit more about numbers later on. But this may be the sole reason that 5 position supports are better than 4 position supports, with very few exceptions. And then same thing goes for camp stacked, but generally speaking, you're going to stack less camps. Especially now with the 1 minute spawns, then you will drop wards. 4 runes grabbed gives you a point. 20 seconds worth of stun on the enemy gives you a point. And deaths and first blood are a little bit of the odd cases. 4 points for first blood. We're really not even going to talk about it. Deaths, anything less than 3 gives you close to 3 points. Anything less than 6, close to 2 points. Anything less than 10, close to 1, or less than 9, I should say. And above that, you're not getting anything because you've died too much. So, roll to modifier, what I think is what you need to be looking for in your cards. Your card is not necessarily good just because it has modifiers on it, stating the obvious. But for cores, I think the tier 1 stats are going to be kills and runes. Runes might be the best stat for a core, especially a mid laner. I think with the changes to the mid lane and having the extra creep, you're almost never going to put a 1 position in that core slot. It's almost always going to be mid laners. They just generally have more kills, and now last hits and GPM, if anything, are better than safe laners, aside from your very good farmers. Right now, the only safe lane actually beating out mid laners in farm is AIM of LGD, and he's not doing it by a wide margin. Like we talked about before, 333 last hits gives you 1 point. So having 350 or 310, it's really negligible, the difference. So I'll put kills and runes up at number 1 for cores, i.e. mid laners. Stuns will be number 2. Tower kills, team fight percentage, Roche, all possible for a mid laner to get. In fact, likely, but just less predictable. So I put it down in tier 3. And then in tier 4 is, limiting their deaths. For the off lane, we're going to look mostly at stuns. Off laners can't really grab runes. It's very difficult for them to do with all the roaming that happens. They need to sit in lane to try and get some, experience from the range creeps, as jungle creeps are worth much less now than lane creeps. So stuns is going to be their major contributor. They're going to be probably the smallest amount of points of all your roles. And then runes grabbed can contribute for them too, but usually you're not looking at more than 7 or 8 runes. So 2 points per game for an offlaner. And then we look at kills and tower kills and team fight percentage. So again, offlaners, you're probably just going to be looking for the one who's most involved and most likely to play an initiator and throw stuns. more or less. They're going to have very similar numbers across the board. I will talk about one kind of outlier with the offlaners later, but we'll get to that. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. So, supporting, the most OP stat, I think, in fantasy, obs wards planted as it should be. Drop your fucking wards in game supports, please. I buy wards too, guys. I'm an offlaner. So I do try and contribute. But you definitely should be, anytime you see if you have a silver card with 15% obs ward planted and a gold card with no obs ward planted, your silver card is probably better if we're talking about 5 positions, 5 position supports. So second tier, I look at runes grabbed, especially for 4 positions. Runes grabbed is going to be, something that where they can kind of make up ground on a 5 position. Just because usually it's all the warding goes to the 5. LGD is the only team that kind of splits between 5 and 4, and even then, and Secret does a little bit, but even then it's very skewed towards the 5 position, obviously. I put tower kills with an asterisk just for some teams that pick Shadow Shaman and Visage and heroes of that nature. So there are some places where you would consider a 4 position, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. And again, stuns, assists, camp stack, team fight percentage, those are kind of your minimal contributors as far as supports go. So moving on, the first thing you want to do in fantasy, always, is pick players from the teams that are playing the most games. There are 6 teams tomorrow playing 3 series, and the remainder of the teams are playing 2 best of 2 series. So these are what you have to choose from. EG is going to face TNC, IGV, Liquid, LGD, Fnatic, Empire, Secret. Empire will take on Secret, LGD, Infamous. Fnatic will face LGD, Liquid, TNC. Liquid will face IGV, Fnatic, EG, and Secret will face Empire, Infamous, LGD. So a lot of overlap between the teams. So you do have to very much consider how they're going to fare against one another. And then there are a couple of mixed-in teams like TNC, IGV, and Infamous that hop in and jump out facing these teams. So already, on paper, I'm looking at, this before any ELO ratings, any sort of ranking, and I'm saying Fnatic has a tough road. LGD, Liquid, TNC, those are 3 tough games, and there are 2 ways to look at that. One way to look at it is the games may draw out. The series can't get longer because they're best of 2s, not 3, but the games may draw out, and for that reason, there may be more kills. So maybe you're looking at it as a fantasy plus, but in general, when a team has tough matchups, I don't look at it as a good thing. You even short games, for the most part, at least on your cores, you're getting more points from a heavy advantage than you are from a super close. So there are more kills in general. We'll see how it actually ends up panning out in practice, but when you have a tough schedule like that, generally you're going to count that team out. So we'll get a little bit more rigorous here with numbers. I looked at the Glicko 1 rating rather than ELO because I believe that ELO kind of counted EG out a little too much because they hadn't played, I guess, recently enough. I'm not sure exactly how it's calculated, but it seems like EG was a little bit too low for my liking. LGD a bit high here, so I think perhaps it's a bit inflated, but still, I would consider them up there, at least with the likes of Liquid, Secret, and EG for sure. So we look at this, and without looking at glaring numbers, like Liquid is obviously number 1 in Glicko ratings, so their massive point differential is not necessarily what you're looking at. So the game started in about 16 hours. I'll try to keep up with chat, guys, as I go along. But basically tomorrow they begin. So I'm trying to get in these fantasy segments once a night, every night before the following day begins. So here, you're kind of 2 obvious things to look at is, so instead of looking at total sum of opponents' Glicko rating, I looked at the sum of the difference between the team that's playing them and their opponent. So as you can see, Liquid is obviously much higher than all of their opponents, but Empire, even though they're facing Infamous, which is considered, probably a pretty free win, no disrespect to the South American team, they are still negative overall on the day, minus 46. Fnatic, much like we said on the first screen, I mean, they're going to have the worst road ahead. So I would recommend not picking players from these 2 teams. There's a slight argument to be made that if you take an outlier like an Empire player that does very well, no one else will have that player. So there's a possibility that you're in the top very small percent if that's what you're rooting for. But the safe picks are to disregard these teams with negative plus minuses versus their opponent. So I don't want to spend too much time on these Glicko ratings because, they aren't necessarily calculated with fantasy in mind. They considered the timelines of tournaments and things of that nature. At least I would think. They could be independent of time, but it certainly looks like with LGD's rating being higher than EG's, that it does have something to do with recency of success, not just success overall. So we'll hop forward. And what we're going to do is basically we're not going to play any players from Fnatic or Empire. So the pool we have to select from for day one, EG, LGD, Liquid, and Secret. So back to what I consider to be, the best modifiers or the best metrics, what you're looking for on your cards. First Blood, we're not going to talk about. Teamfight participation, for similar reasons, is very hard to talk about. But in general, you can assume like roughly half for your supports. Your one position will be a little bit less, and offlaner and mid lane perhaps a bit more, depending on the hero. There's an Invoker kind of scenario where you can control everywhere or Zeus, but in general, looking at around half. So we'll kind of consider most roles and most players on an even playing field when it comes to First Blood, Roche kills, and teamfight percentage, just because of their kind of unpredictability. And again, back to the best modifiers for the roles. Those are the things you want to look for on your card. So first thing we're going to look at is cores. All right, we talked about how mid lane. I was considering putting AIM, LGD AIM in this, and if you check out that Dota and look at his stats recently, he's actually killing everyone in last hits. But like I said, last hits 333 for 1 point. So just because he has 20 last hits on average more than the next nearest competitor really doesn't mean squat. There was a long game in there as well, so that average might be a bit inflated. But either way, it's not worth, the safe laners having less creeps to them, being less involved in fights. It's not worth taking a one position almost ever, regardless of what the numbers say. So Sumail, MidOne, Miracle, maybe of the four teams we talked about. I talked about how important runes grabbed is, and to some extent that's gonna depend upon what team brings support to the mid lane the most, what team has the best mid laner, in the sense that he actually lanes very well mechanically. So obviously you're looking at Sumail at the very beginning, but all of these players, for obvious reason, very talented in their own right. So we look at kills. Miracle actually by a decent margin ahead of Sumail and MidOne, and maybe about at par with him, at least in 7.06. Assists go the way of maybe. Stuns go the way of Miracle again, surprisingly enough. We don't necessarily, he's not necessarily noteworthy for heroes that have stuns, but hey, they could throw in a DK. You think of kind of Invoker or Huskar, TI7, these type of heroes for Miracle. But his average stun duration is actually quite high. So towers, MidOne takes the lowest deaths as well, right? You want to be limited in the way of death. So the numbers right here, I mean, if you look across the board, maybe very solid, aside from maybe tower kills, and Miracle pretty much clearly the best. So when we get to my picks a little bit later on, I may have some splaining to do, but I think the safe picks, very, very safe picks, are Sumail and Miracle. Blue card, silver card, whatever you have, those are your safest picks. The only thing I would say is if you have a big runes grabbed modifier or a big kills modifier, then maybe you consider one of the other mid laners. The other thing to mention is strength of schedule. So even though this rating shows Liquid having the easiest day, I think IGV, Fnatic, and EG are better opponents than Empire, Infamous, and LG. And I think most people would agree with me. So I think Fnatic and Empire are comparable. I think IGV absolutely blows Infamous out of the water, and I think EG is slightly better than LGD, if not considerably. So I think, truthfully, even though those Glico ratings show that Liquid has the best differential in terms of their skill and their opponent's skill, I think truly Secret has the easiest schedule of the teams playing 3 series tomorrow. So keep your eyes on MidOne. He does have the most towers, the lowest deaths, and he keeps up admirably in other categories. He's a little bit low in kills, but remember, this team does have Yapzor, who has absolutely astronomical numbers in all categories for a 4 position. All right, so we're going to talk about supports. So just to wrap this one up quickly, your safe picks are Sumail and Miracle, perhaps even Miracle and maybe. But MidOne does have an easy strength of schedule tomorrow. Consider him if you have very good modifiers on your cards. And what I mean by good modifiers is basically, the kills, rune scraps, stuns, these things higher up on the tier list. All right, let's talk about supports a bit. So I put 5 supports here, 4 of which are 5 positions, because Observer Wards Planted is the most OP stat in fantasy, and 1 is Yap God. Honorable mention to GH and Victoria here. GH, although we see him as a very flashy player, and he does make countless amount of very significant tide-turning plays, his numbers are just not that good. He actually has very high deaths, and that's probably because his team relies on him to be involved a lot, to make space, to open team fights, and do things of that nature. So he does pay a little bit of the sacrificial lamb there. And his kills, his stun duration, pretty much every metric on this chart are by a wide margin lower than Yapzor's. Yapzor is an absolute anomaly, a complete standout. He kills Kezu's stats. So Kezu plays in the offlane, but there are arguments to consider Yapzor the 3 position in terms of at least greed for this team and how much he's given. And it's interesting to see how Secret has adapted to Yapzor rather than Yapzor adapting to Secret. A team with kind of Pylai Die in that position just not too long ago. So very, very interesting dynamic there. So I had to include Yapzor. I also am biased because I have a gold Yapzor card. But anyways, so we're talking Puppey, Yao, Kuroki, and Crit. Kuroki by far, and I've looked at many games on Dota Buff, and this definitely holds true, the most warding support in Dota 2 right now. I've seen him upwards of 25 wards a game. Obviously, that depends on duration. You can only buy so many wards per time interval. But Kuroki, there is absolutely no one else on that team. Other teams have 1 or 2 here and there by the 4 position, by the offlaner who has a bit of extra cash. But Kuroki does absolutely all the warding for Liquid. So he almost needs to be in your support lineup if you have the card. And the only argument against Kuroki is if you have a major Obs Wards Planted modifier, like 15-20% on one of these other candidates, Puppey, Crit, or Yao. He kills wards. Yapzor, a stun duration, all right? So this is 50 seconds of stun he averages per game. Absolutely insane. The next closest competitor being Puppey, surprisingly enough, at 35. I mean, he does kind of play Chen here and there. I guess you get some extra stuns from the neutrals, but that seems high, and it seems like it should be. So I would definitely consider Puppey and respect that stat. Otherwise, most supports on par. I talked about earlier how LGD kind of share the 4 and 5 a bit more than other teams. And that's why Yao's numbers are a bit low, and therefore Victoria's numbers are abnormally high for a 4 position. And he's also much more involved kill-wise than any of these kind of supports other than Yapzor, or he's nearly on par with Yapzor. So Victoria, if you have a good J or Victoria card, also a consideration. I did not, so I didn't put him on this chart. So moving on to kills, Yapzor, again, blows the competition out of the water at 4.73. But Crit, Kuro, and Yao, all good in terms of their kill averages. So bit of an argument against Puppey. And if you consider these first 3 columns, if we count Kuro or Yapzor, you're putting them in if you have a great card. Crit is better than Puppey, aggregating all of these stats. And the assists are relatively even across the board, with crit lacking a bit, but 12 to 14 assists on average roughly for these players. And that I had the assists in the third tier, because you do need 7 assists for 1 point. So, 14 assists is a pretty good support game. It is average actually for them. But again, 2 points there, 13 wards, you're talking 6.5 points. One tower kill, which, these guys don't necessarily average. They average about half, if even that. A tower kill gives you half a point. So these assists, while, 2 points is the average there, it's not necessarily, the biggest stat. Where stuns, we're averaging over a point easily. In the case of YapzOr, quite a bit more. So maybe I should have moved assists up to 2, as they are getting 2 points a game on average, to a tier 2 stat. So definitely consider assists, but I think overall, obs, wards planted, stuns, assists is what you're looking at. And then kills for support. Kills a little bit less, so they're averaging about a point, fantasy point worth of kills per game. So YapzOr, he's the only 4 position I would really consider. If you have a really good runes grabbed for Jerax or GH or someone like that, and the rest of the card is very nice, you might want to consider it. But in general, play your 5 positions, especially with obs, ward plan, and modifiers. So, off lane. I have an EG jersey on. I'm not biased. Pick this guy. Just pick this guy. Kezu, because of YapzOr, and this is not holding true for the entire tournament, just today. Pick Mind Control, I think. Old 11, there's an argument for him. His numbers are good. His deaths are concerningly high, though. Mind Control's deaths are very low. Not quite as low as Universe's, but the rest of his numbers are better. And as I mentioned before, offlaners are just very hard to kind of get a good contribution out of them. They're not going to be your big point getters. But I think Mind Control is involved in fights. He sometimes plays greedier heroes like the Furion, so he can get his GPM up. But generally, like I said, stuns is going to be the big thing from offlaners. I think Mind Control is on the best team, with a pretty weak schedule. I think, well, a weaker maybe schedule relative to their strength. As I said before, Secret has the best schedule, but Kezu's numbers are almost support level as YapzOr kind of takes over the offlaner numbers on that team. So I think take Mind Control. There's an argument for Old 11 if you have a much better Old 11 card with like good stuns and teamfight participation, but I would take Mind Control. I'm going to take him here, even with just a silver card. That's not that great in terms of modifiers. So without further ado, time for you guys to flame me. There's my brother. Am I on? Midweek pass. How much you buy it for? How much you want to resell it for? I'm a pleb, guys. I can't make it to TI. Flight and hotel just ended up being a little too expensive for me. And Fog won't let me sleep with him. He offered for early in the week. Anyways, caveat, I do have 48 Arcana votes left, so for the 2 of you that are watching this, if you want to jump in the chat and yell at me, I will certainly vote the way you tell me not to. On to the compendium and on to fantasy. The real... So, I talked about putting 5 positions in absolutely unequivocally, kind of rule of thumb, and I didn't. I didn't put my Curl card. I put in YapzOr. So just to let you know, my Curl card is Deaths, Creep Score, and Camp Stacked, which are all pretty absolutely garbage. Let's just be honest. Camp Stacked is like, in some games, decent at best. If I could ever get a point off of stacking camps. So let's say I stack 6 camps as Curl. I get 3 points and I add a 0.6 to that. Whereas with YapzOr, he's got 20% GPM, 20% runes grabbed, which is huge for a 4 position like YapzOr. And he's also got 15% stuns. And we saw that average stuns 50 seconds a game. He's averaging in 7.06. So this man just does work. I put him in for that reason. I really think he can pan out. If you don't have a great Yapsor card, and arguably, if you have a Kuro card that's even close to Yapsor, play Kuroki or play Puppy. The reason I played Crit over Kuroki, even though Kuroki had better numbers, is 15% Obsword. That is just no question. Obsword planted, 5-position support. I'm going to take him. Again, my modifiers for Mind Control aren't great, but my old 11 card is common. So I liked lack of deaths on Mind Control a little better. I also like the inclination for him to play a little bit more of a greedy hero. So that's why I took Mind Control. And then this is maybe the biggest explanation I need to give you guys. So if we hop back into the slides here. Boom. We hop back into the slides quickly. MidOne has very low numbers in kill and assists. I mean, I say very low. I mean relatively low numbers in kills and assists. And he also is low in stuns. But like I said earlier, I just think he has the weakest strength of schedule relative to his team's ability. And for that reason, I think he's really going to shine tomorrow. Also, I have common Miracle and Sumail cards, so I really got fucked on that front. Let me just back into Dota here. So my Miracle card is blue. My Sumail card is blue. My Maybe card is silver, but runes grabbed is really the only good stat there. So we're looking at maybe 15 to 16 runes a game, which is about 8 points. Plus 10% is not bad. Another point or so, 0.8. So it may be worth considering if you have a blue Sumail to put in maybe. But I took Sumail simply because he's Sumail. I'm not gonna hate myself for it tomorrow. So I took Sumail. You guys feel free to put in Miracle, or maybe they may very well both do better. I really think EG is going to come out strong tomorrow, and my MidOne pick is simply strength of schedule is weak. I had decent modifiers, stuns and team fight, 5%, 10%, not great. Truthfully, if I was being smart, I should probably put it Miracle in this slot, even though he's common. But this is my lineup, so I hope you guys see any sort of merit in it. If not, we can always discuss. I definitely feel like my offlane and support picks are good. So if you want to take cues from that, do so. But like I said, any combination of maybe Miracle, Sumail, and MidOne, and the numbers argue that Miracle and maybe should probably be your two. But any combination of those heroes are good in the core role. So you can make an argument for old 11 in the offlane. I'll talk a bit about Universe. His numbers are low. One thing to mention that's great about Universe is of all the players on these 4 teams, Secret, Liquid, LGD, and EG, Universe has the lowest average deaths of all of them. So he should give you a couple points off deaths, but a couple points is a couple points. The best you can do off deaths if you don't die is 3 points. So it's really not, unless you have a huge modifier, it's really, and even when you do 25% of 3 points, 3.75, you're still talking pretty low. So that's kind of the bright spot for Universe and team fight participation, but I just don't feel that they do enough. So I took Mind Control. I really think he's the offlane pick tomorrow. Definitely take Kuroki if you have even a decent card. Again, the reason I have Yapsor in is I just think he's going to go off. He also has the big stun modifier. He has a huge average on stuns per game. And the reason I took Crit over Kuroki is because he has 15% Obs wards planted. So the average was like 13.5 wards planted for Kuroki and like 12.1 wards for Crit. So that extra 15% is going to put me kind of over the hurdle there. So I took Crit. Also, we get to go with the boys in blue. I do also have an MP jersey, to be frank and honest with everyone. But it's no longer NP, it's Cloud9. So till then, guys. This has been swell. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'm going to do this once an evening, every evening. Feel free to tweet me anything fantasy related. I definitely don't claim to be an expert, but I would love to chat with you about it. And we can talk about kind of matchups. If you have 2 cards, you don't know which one to play in which slot, absolutely shoot me those inquiries, and I will try and get back to you as quickly as I can. Twitter, probably the best way to do so. You can follow me at MRP Dota. But there's really no other reason to follow me. So just tweet me. Until then, guys, I hope you've enjoyed. I will be back once an evening. I don't know if I'll have, a pretty presentation ready for you every evening, but I'll at least compare the metrics and I'll tell you what are the teams that are playing the most games. So for the 2nd of August, I'm going to go with MidOne, Sumail, Mind Control, Yapzor, and Crit. The honorable mentions to put in are Kuroki or Puppy if you have great modifiers on their cards. Even J is a consideration, Victoria or J. I wouldn't put in Yao, though, honestly, unless you have like 20% Obsword Planet. And then I think the best core play tomorrow is probably Sumail Miracle. I'm going to go with MidOne just because I think he has an easier schedule. And he is the best core card I have, at least in terms of mod. Yeah. All right, guys. Hope you've enjoyed. MRP, your resident Canadian Dota 2 caster. Going to sign out from here. I'll be back tomorrow around the same time, 8:30 to 9 EST. We'll talk some more.